They seated me at the back of the room, near the service entrance, at my own son's promotion dinner. Not near the back, at the back. The last table before the kitchen doors, where waitstaff kept pushing through with trays, letting out little bursts of heat and the smell of grease every time they swung open. I could hear the dishwasher running. That's how far back I was. My son David had been promoted to senior vice president at the engineering firm where he'd worked for 11 years. 11 years I'd watched him climb. I remember driving him to his first interview in my old Silverado, the one with the cracked dashboard. Him in a suit he bought at Winners, and ironed 3 times that morning because the collar kept wrinkling. I'd sat in the parking lot and waited for 45 minutes because he didn't want to take transit and be late. I hadn't minded at all. That was a long time ago. The dinner was held at a restaurant in downtown Toronto. One of those places where the menu doesn't list prices and the chairs are uncomfortable on purpose. Like the discomfort is part of the experience. My daughter-in-law, Christine, had organized everything. She was very good at organizing things. She'd been organizing my relationship with my son for the better part of 5 years, slowly and efficiently, the way you reorganize a closet until nothing you own before still fits. I'd taken the Joe train in from Hamilton, pressed my good shirt, the one I wear to funerals and, apparently, dinners where I'm seated next to the dishwasher. I'm 63 years old, retired from Ontario Hydro after 32 years as a lineman. My hands are rough and my back gives me trouble in the winter. I am not a man who belongs in restaurants where the water comes in a glass bottle. I knew that walking in. I didn't need the seating arrangement to remind me. But it did anyway. Christine found me at the coat check. She was wearing something sleek and dark, her hair up, already managing the room the way she always managed rooms, surveying, categorizing, dispatching. She smiled when she saw me. She has a very practiced smile. "We've got you set up at a lovely table," she said, quieter, away from all the chaos up front. "I thought you'd prefer it." I said that sounded fine, because what else do you say? The maitre d' walked me back and I counted the tables as we passed them. 8 tables, 9, 10. A couple near the window. A group of Christine's colleagues at a round table near the center. David's direct team clustered near the front. His boss at the head table with a few other executives I'd never met. My table was against the back wall. 2 chairs. 1 place setting. A small vase with a single flower in it, the way they dress up tables to make them look intentional rather than isolated. I sat down. I put my napkin in my lap. I looked at the room full of people celebrating my son, and I was as far from him as I could be without standing outside in the rain. A server came and filled my water glass without making eye contact. I thought about leaving. Genuinely considered picking up my jacket, walking back through those kitchen doors by accident, finding the rear exit, and taking the train back to Hamilton. David would have noticed eventually, might have texted the next day. Or Christine would have told him I left early because I wasn't feeling well, and that would have been the version of events that stuck. I didn't leave. I ordered a sparkling water and looked at the bread basket and told myself this was still my son's night, and it meant something to be here, even at this table that smelled faintly of bleach and garlic. That's when the man sat down. It came from the direction of the main entrance, walking with the kind of unhurried confidence that takes decades to develop. He was around my age, maybe a few years younger, silver at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that had not been rented from anywhere. He glanced at the room, glanced at my table, and then simply walked over and sat down in the empty chair across from me, as though he'd been planning to all along. "You look like a man who could use some company," he said. I laughed. I don't know why. It just came out. Maybe because it was so direct, or because I hadn't expected anyone to come near this table voluntarily. "That obvious?" I said. "A little." He picked up the menu and opened it without any fanfare. "Daniel Marsh." "Edwin Kowalski," I said. We shook hands across the table. His grip was firm, the kind you develop working with your hands or spending a lot of time convincing other people to trust you. I wasn't sure which yet. "You with the firm?" I asked. He turned a page in the menu, in a manner of speaking. "And you?" "Father of the guest of honor," I said. "Apparently that earned you a table by the kitchen." He looked up from the menu then, just briefly, with an expression that I couldn't fully read. Not pity. something more careful than that. David Kowalski's your son, he said. It wasn't a question. For 34 years, I said, whether he likes it or not. Daniel smiled at that. He had the kind of face that looked like it had seen a lot and made peace with most of it. We ordered. He got the rack of lamb. I got the salmon because it was the second cheapest thing on the menu, and old habits from 30 years of watching what I spent don't disappear just because someone put a cloth napkin on your lap. We talked, the way strangers talk when there's nothing to perform for each other. I told him about hydro, about the ice storms, about a blackout we'd worked through back in 2013 when I'd been up a pole for 6 hours in January and come down to find my supervisor had driven out with a thermos of coffee and a breakfast sandwich from Tim Hortons. Small dignities. That's what I remember most about that job, the small dignities people extended to each other in difficult conditions. He listened well, didn't check his phone, didn't look past me to see who else was in the room. I asked him what he did, and he said he was in infrastructure investment, that he'd spent most of his career working on public utilities projects across Ontario and Quebec, that he'd been involved in the hydro restructuring in the early 2000s. You'd have been in the system then, he said. I was, I said, a lot of uncertainty. Some people left, I stayed. Why'd you stay? I thought about it, because I knew the work, and the pension was good, and I didn't want to start over somewhere I didn't understand just because someone in an office decided to reorganize everything. He nodded slowly, like that answer meant something to him. We were halfway through dinner when Christine appeared at my table. She looked at Daniel, and then she looked at me, and something passed across her face that I'd never seen there before. A crack in the management. Mr. Marsh, she said, and her voice had shifted into a register I didn't recognize. Careful, almost formal. I didn't realize I had you seated at the main table with David and Tybe. I prefer it here, he said simply. Edwin and I have been having a very good conversation. Christine's eyes moved to me. Just for a second, then back to him. Of course, she said. Can I get you anything? I can have them. We're fine, he said. Thank you, Christine. She left. I watched her walk back through the room and leaned down to say something to my son. David looked up. Across the full length of the restaurant, through all the tables and the candlelight and the people who'd been given better seats than me, he looked at me, and then he looked at the man sitting across from me. And whatever Christine had just told him, it had changed the color of his face. I turned back to Daniel. You want to tell me what just happened? I said. He took a sip of his wine, set the glass down. Your son's firm is in the middle of a significant infrastructure contract, he said. A provincial project. 8 years, roughly $2 billion. My company holds a majority stake in the consortium managing it. I was quiet for a moment. So you're his company's largest client, he said, and as of last quarter, the person responsible for deciding whether they're awarded the Phase 2 extension. I looked at my salmon, then out of the room. He didn't know who I'd be sitting next to, I said. No, he didn't. Christine didn't either, not until just now. No. I thought about the train ride in, the pressed shirt, the coat check, the walk back through 9, 10, 11 tables to this chair that smelled like the kitchen. I'm not asking you to do anything on my account, I said. I want to be clear about that. Daniel looked at me with something that I think was genuine respect. I know, he said. That's not why I sat down. Then why did you? He was quiet for a moment. He set his fork down carefully. I grew up in Sudbury, he said. My father worked the smelter for 26 years. When I got my first real job, real money, company car, the whole thing, my ex-wife's family organized a dinner to celebrate. They sat my father at the children's table. He was 61 years old. He had these hands. He stopped. Looked at his own. He died 4 years later. We never talked about that dinner. I think about it more than I should. I didn't say anything. There are moments when talking is the wrong thing to do. I saw them walk you back here, he said, and I thought, not again, not if I can do something about it. We sat for a while after that, without speaking much, and it was comfortable in the way that very few silences with strangers ever are. At the end of the evening, when they brought David up to the front of the room to say a few words, Daniel stood up from my table and began applauding before anyone else in the room. Not politely, genuinely, loudly. Several people turned to see who was leading it. They saw him, and then they saw me. And then they applauded too, the way rooms do when someone with presence decides how the room should feel. David saw. He saw all of it. His father at the back table and the man who could extend his entire career for the next 8 years, applauding him together from the worst seat in the restaurant. I don't know what my face looked like in that moment. I hope it was composed. I didn't feel composed. I felt like a man who had almost left through the kitchen door and was very glad he hadn't. After the speeches, David came to find me. Christine was a step behind him, and for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't leading. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood at the edge of the table looking at me, and I could see him doing the kind of accounting a person does when they realize the cost of something they thought was free. "Dad," he said. "David," I said. "I didn't know where I should have checked." "It's all right," I said. "Because I am 63 years old, and I have learned when to let a moment be what it is." "It's not," he said. And the way he said it, I believed he meant it. Christine said, "Edwin, I'm sorry. I thought I had this idea about the seating that She stopped. There isn't a clean way to finish that sentence, and I think she knew it. I said it was fine and that I'd had a very good dinner and an unexpected good conversation, both of which were true. Daniel had made his way over by then, and he shook David's hand and said his son was a man to be proud of, and that the Phase 2 discussions would be in good hands. David shook his hand with both of his, the way you do when you're trying to communicate something more than a handshake can hold. On the train back to Hamilton, I sat by the window and watched the city thin out into suburbs, and then into the flat dark of the 401 corridor. I thought about my father, who'd worked at a steel plant in Sault Ste. Marie and never once asked to be recognized for it. Just showed up, did the work, came home. That was its own kind of dignity. I'd learned it from him, and I'd tried to pass it on. Though somewhere along the way the lesson had gotten complicated. I don't tell this story to make David look bad. He is a good man who got caught somewhere between who he is and who his wife needed him to be in that room full of important people. I've watched that happen to better men. I tell it because of what happened 3 weeks later when David drove out to Hamilton on a Saturday morning unannounced, with 2 coffees and a box of Timbits, and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. We talked about his grandfather, about the Silverado, about a fishing trip we'd taken in Algonquin Park when he was 12 and it rained for 3 days straight, and we played cribbage in the tent until we'd both memorized each other's tells. He said, "I've been thinking about that dinner." I said, "You don't have to." He said, "I want to." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "When I saw you sitting there with Daniel Marsh, I felt ashamed. Not because of him, because I walked into that restaurant and I let them put you at the back, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was fine. I told myself you wouldn't mind." "I minded," I said. "Not unkindly, just truthfully." "I know," he said. "I know that now. There's a thing that happens when a son tells you he was wrong. Not the words exactly. People say sorry for all kinds of reasons, and most of them don't cost much. It's something else. The way the room gets quieter. The way he didn't look away. I told him that I wasn't going anywhere. That he was my son, and that didn't have an expiry date and didn't come with conditions. That the important thing to me wasn't the table. It was the drive out on a Saturday morning with 2 coffees. He nodded, took a Timbit, said, "Mom used to make you drive all the way to Barrie for the good ones." "She did," I said, "every Easter." We laughed, and that laugh felt like something coming back. Not all the way back, you don't get all the way back, but enough to build from. I am 63 years old. I worked 32 years so my son could sit at the head table. I don't need to be at the head table myself. I never did. But I needed him to know I deserved better than the kitchen door, and now he does. I keep coming back to the moment I almost left. I had my napkin on my lap and the kitchen door swinging open behind me, and I genuinely thought about picking up my jacket and walking out, Nobody would have stopped me. David might have noticed by dessert. Christine would have had a clean explanation ready before the train reached Aldershot. I didn't leave. I'm not sure it was courage exactly. It was something quieter than that. The decision to stay in a room where you've been made to feel small, not because you owe it to anyone, but because leaving would mean agreeing with what the seating arrangement was trying to tell you about your worth. And I'd spent 63 years knowing better than that. There's a thing I've noticed about the way life tends to settle accounts. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive on schedule. Daniel Marsh didn't walk into that restaurant because the universe was balancing some ledger on my behalf. He walked in because he was a decent man who'd carried his own version of that back table his whole life and decided, when he saw it happening to someone else, to do something small about it. That's all it was. One person choosing not to look away. But that choice, that one quiet decision, changed everything that followed. I think about what David said at my kitchen table 3 weeks later. That he'd seen me sitting there and told himself I wouldn't mind. That's the thing that stays with me. Not the seating chart. Not Christine's practiced smile. The story we tell ourselves to avoid the discomfort of knowing we've done something wrong. David is a smart man, smart enough to close a $2 billion infrastructure deal, smart enough to read a room full of executives and know exactly what to say. But intelligence, without the willingness to look honestly at yourself, is just a sharper tool for building the wrong things. He looked honestly at himself that Saturday morning. That took something. It would have been easier to send a text, or let the whole thing fade, or decide that his father was the kind of man who didn't hold grudges and therefore didn't need an apology. He drove out instead. He brought coffee. He sat at my table and said the thing that was hard to say. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if they take anything at all. Not the part where the important man happened to sit next to me and the right people found out. Strip all that away and the story is simpler. A man was treated as though he didn't matter. He stayed anyway. He stayed because 32 years of hard work and hard weather had taught him that your value isn't determined by where someone else decides to put you. And his son, given the chance to keep pretending, chose not to. I worked my whole life so David wouldn't have to climb poles in January ice storms. That was the point. But I also wanted him to know that the man who did that work was worth sitting next to, not because of what I'd built, or what connections I might have, or whether I could help his career along, just because I was his father and I'd shown up. He knows that now. That's enough. That's more than enough.